There is a strange paradox that very few dare to face. The most sensitive souls of humanity are often the ones most vulnerable to harm. Behind eyes that know how to listen, behind a heart that longs to bring healing to others, lies a history of wounds that have never been fully acknowledged. Carl Jung called them the wounded healers, individuals who not only live with their own pain, but transform that very pain into a unique frequency of vibration. A frequency that is warm, magnetic, and yet dangerous, for it radiates a light that darkness easily seeks to possess. Modern neuroscience has confirmed this in very concrete ways. Their brains process emotions and social signals differently from most people, more deeply, more intricately. They are like living antennas, able to sense subtle vibrations that others overlook. A flicker in the eyes, a minor drop in tone, an unusual pause in conversation. Because of this, they hold the gift of deep empathy, the ability to connect and even to soothe the unseen wounds of others. But for the same reason, they often become the ideal energy source for manipulators and emotional vampires who drain them dry and leave them in isolation. Here, the paradox becomes clear. Their spiritual gift, if left unprotected, becomes a burden. Their sensitivity, if not rooted in inner strength, turns into a double-edged sword. The question is no longer simply, why do I hurt? But rather, how can I transform this sensitivity into a source of maturity instead of letting it drag me into darkness? How can a wounded healer evolve into a sovereign healer, one who preserves their delicate sensitivity yet stands on unshakable ground, no longer easily controlled? This is not a simple story, but a journey through the shadows, through accepting the parts of oneself once denied, and from there, being reborn in a new form. Today's video is an invitation for you to step onto that path. Under the light of Jung's wisdom and the insights of modern science, we will explore together the keys to turning suffering into wisdom, sensitivity into strength, and your very life into a path of growth, freedom, and wholeness. Part 1. The origins of the empath's radiance. At first glance, people often assume that your unusual sensitivity is a gift you were simply born with, as if you were granted the ability to feel the world more deeply from birth. Yet through Carl Jung's psychoanalytic lens, nothing in the human psyche is ever purely accidental. Every quality, every capacity, including empathy, is shaped by a complex process. The ongoing interplay between environment, the collective unconscious, and each individual's instinct for survival. Jung observed that most empaths did not grow up in the absolute safety of a sheltered home. On the contrary, they often came of age in households where the emotional atmosphere was tense and unpredictable. In such homes, a single frown could signal the storm of anger about to erupt. A sigh might announce silent chaos. The child was forced to learn how to read subtle signals in order to survive, watching the dilation of eyes, listening to the tremor in a voice, sensing the vibration in the room to know when to withdraw. This state of hypervigilance, repeated over years, gradually programmed the nervous system into an instrument of extraordinary sensitivity. Modern neuroscience has confirmed this intuition with biological evidence. Studies on mirror neurons reveal that in highly sensitive individuals, these brain regions are far more active than in the average person. This means they do not merely observe, they feel within their own bodies the emotions of others. The limbic system, the emotional processing center, reacts more intensely, turning the entire nervous system into a living antenna, constantly resonating with the emotional environment around them. This is the very source of what Jung called the frequency of the wounded healer. It is not simply kindness nor mere natural goodness. It is a survival mechanism that has been alchemized through suffering. That child, in their effort to keep themselves and others safe, forged an extraordinary ability to perceive the hidden waves of emotion beneath behavior. And as an adult, that ability radiates outward as an energetic field, a kind of aura, capable of supporting, comforting, and sometimes healing others simply through silent presence. Yet, as Jung always reminded us, every light is paired with a shadow. The empath's radiance is a double-edged sword. If you are conscious of it, you become a psychological alchemist, transforming pain into wisdom, turning empathy into a force of connection and creativity. But if you remain unaware of its true nature, you risk becoming nothing more than an emotional sponge, easily drained by sorrows that are not your own. In his notes, Jung often invoked an ancient concept: participation mystique, unconscious identification. He observed that empaths frequently blur the boundaries between self and other. They do not merely witness sorrow, they carry it as if it were their own wound. They do not merely hear anger, they feel it pulsing in their very blood. This identification opens the door to profound empathy, but also makes them vulnerable to losing their authentic I in the vast ocean of another's emotions. Fascinatingly, modern psychology echoes this. Elaine Aron, through her studies on the group she named highly sensitive persons, HSPs, found that their brains process sensory information at a far deeper level, especially in areas tied to emotional memory and social cognition. In other words, their neural wiring is truly different. They are born to feel more, deeper, wider. And it is here that the paradox reveals itself. The very capacity that makes you a pillar of support for many also makes you a target for manipulators. Energy vampires, Jung's term for psychological parasites, are powerfully drawn to your energetic field. They recognize in you a special ability to carry, to absorb, even to transform pain. And so they cling, unloading all that they cannot bear onto you. This is why so many empaths ask themselves, why do I always attract toxic relationships? Why do narcissists keep finding me? According to Jung, the answer lies in archetypal constellations, the activation of collective patterns. Your radiance acts like a magnet. It attracts not only light but also darkness. It stirs within others the very parts they try to deny: envy, fear, rage. And instead of confronting these, they unconsciously project them onto you. Though it may sound frightening, Jung never saw this as a tragedy, but rather as an opportunity for growth. For the moment you realize, what I am feeling is not entirely mine, that is the moment you begin the process of individuation. It is the path of learning to distinguish between personal emotions and collective ones, of setting boundaries not to reject empathy, but to protect it so it may become a conscious, luminous power. And here lies the turning point. From wounded healer, you may evolve into sovereign healer. In the next part, we will dive into the mechanism of emotional alchemy that Jung emphasized, how a sensitive nervous system does not merely absorb, but can transform pain into wisdom, and why only through awareness can this gift become a blessing rather than a curse. Part 2. The emotional alchemy of the empath. Carl Jung once emphasized that hidden within every pain lies a potential for transformation. For him, empaths are not merely those who feel more, but individuals who possess a rare capacity: the ability to transmute raw emotions, heavy, chaotic, even destructive, into wisdom, compassion, and healing power. This is not a mystical phenomenon, but the result of a profound psychological mechanism where the unconscious and conscious intersect, where shadow and light are reconciled. Jung called this process the transcendent function, the capacity to hold opposing forces until a higher level of consciousness emerges. In clinical practice, Jung observed that empaths often go beyond simply recognizing the emotions of others. They absorb those emotions into their body and psyche as if they were their own experiences. He referred to this as participation, mystique, unconscious identification. But here lies the difference. Instead of being eroded by those foreign emotions like most people would, many empaths activate an invisible process akin to alchemy. The anger of another can transmute into understanding, nameless fear into compassion, unspoken grief into guiding intuition. Their nervous system functions like a psychological furnace. transforming the lead of raw emotion into the gold of human wisdom. Modern science is now catching up to this intuition. Brain imaging studies show that when a highly sensitive person encounters negative emotions, the prefrontal cortex, the executive center for regulation and cognitive reframing, becomes highly active. This phenomenon, known as emotional reappraisal, allows threatening experiences to be reinterpreted through a new lens with deeper meaning and less destruction. Jung saw this as evidence of an eternal principle. Pain is not only meant to be endured, but can serve as raw material for the soul's expansion. Still, Jung warned, this capacity is a blessing only when guided by consciousness. Operating unconsciously, the empath easily becomes an emotional sponge, absorbing the shadows of others until they sink into exhaustion, insomnia, even depression. In such cases, no alchemy takes place. The soul becomes merely a dumping ground for emotional waste. This tragedy explains why many empaths fall into burnout, self-doubt, and confusion about where they end and others begin. To avoid this danger, Jung proposed a principle he called conscious suffering. This means learning to remain present with emotions, both one's own and others, in a state of mindful observation, rather than reacting impulsively or carrying everything. When an empath can sit still with pain without fleeing, without fusing with it, they allow the emotion to complete its full life cycle, arising, dissolving, and being reborn in a new form. Just as crude metal must endure fire to be transformed, emotions too must be melted in the flame of awareness in order to become wisdom. In practice, this process may unfold through many forms: meditation, journaling, psychotherapy, or creative expression. All of these create a laboratory of the soul, a space where emotions can emerge, be witnessed, and finally be transmuted. At that point, the empath is no longer a victim of sensitivity, but a true psychological alchemist, consciously using their sensitivity to generate value. The miracle is that when this process is complete, the empath's radiance becomes a resonant mirror. Others, in their presence, feel lighter and illuminated, not because the empath has sacrificed their energy, but because their presence has awakened the latent healing power within the other. This is a form of healing by resonance, where the empath does not deplete themselves, but simply reflects the wholeness waiting to be awakened in the other. Thus, emotional alchemy is not some distant miracle, but a real psychobiological process, from absorption to holding emotional fire to reappraisal and transformation. It is both a gift and a challenge. A gift when you engage it with awareness and use it to expand yourself. A challenge when it runs unconsciously and drowns you. And it is on this fragile boundary that the empath's journey enters a decisive stage, learning to distinguish between self and other, learning to preserve the I while remaining open, so that empathy becomes a luminous strength rather than a curse. Part 3. Dangers and Traps. When Radiance Attracts Both Light and Shadow. We have just explored one of Jung's most pivotal insights, the empath's power of emotional alchemy, the ability to turn pain into wisdom and fragility into a source of light that uplifts the collective. Yet here, another paradox emerges. For every light casts a shadow, every strong source of energy becomes a dual magnet. If in the previous section we witnessed the healing power of empathic radiance, we must now face its other side, the dangers and traps that very light may create. According to Jung, the empath's aura functions like an archetypal magnet. It not only draws those seeking healing, but also stirs up unresolved figures within the collective unconscious. Wounded inner children who were never embraced, shadow, projections seeking escape, and particularly psychological parasites, those who survive only by feeding on the energy of others. In Jung's language, this is the activation of archetypal constellations. When the empath's field resonates with unprocessed complexes, they are triggered, and the other is drawn to the empath as if to a mirror reflecting the parts they dare not face. If you are honest with yourself, you may have asked, why do I always attract people with so much damage? Why do I move from one dramatic or toxic relationship to another? From Jung's perspective, this is not accidental. When wounds within you remain unintegrated, your radiance emits a matching energetic signature. That very signal calls forth others vibrating at the same frequency, replaying the cycle until you learn to recognize and transmute it. This is the principle of enantiodromia, the return of the opposite. What has been denied will seek to return, often through relationships with others. Modern science affirms this at a social level. Studies on trauma bonding show that people are drawn to familiar patterns from childhood, even when they bring pain. For empaths, this attraction is even stronger, for their sensitive field unconsciously broadcasts a promise: I can carry this with you. But when such bonds occur unconsciously, they do not lead to healing. They merely prolong the cycle of suffering. Jung called this archetypal confusion. Empaths often struggle to discern who arrives to heal with them and who comes only to drain them. On one side, they may meet mature souls, conscious seekers, ready to walk together and grow. On the other, they may be pulled into spirals with energy vampires, those incapable of self-healing, clinging only to others' emotions. In the unconscious state, the boundary is so thin that empaths easily fall into identification, losing themselves. A vivid illustration is found in relationships with narcissists. For them, the empath's aura is like an endless supply. They are drawn to the empath's depth of compassion, but instead of maturing through it, they exploit it as fuel to sustain their illusion of power. The empath, believing they are helping, in reality only feeds the narcissist's bottomless void. This is a living example of Jung's warning. Any psychological gift without consciousness can become a double-edged sword. So what is the path out of this trap? Jung did not advise withdrawing from the world or closing the heart. Instead, he emphasized the power of discernment, conscious differentiation. That is, learning to recognize who comes as a resonant mirror and who arrives as a parasite. The empath must learn to reflect not only outward but inward, to distinguish which emotions are their own and which are borrowed from others. Then they can hold compassion without losing identity, open their heart without dissolving into another. It is precisely at this boundary that the journey of emotional alchemy becomes complete. For light cannot exist apart from shadow, and shadow does not appear to destroy the light, but to compel it to grow stronger. The empath does not need to flee from the darkness of others. They must learn to stand firm before it, holding their own center, allowing their radiance to become a mirror, not to carry another's burden, but to remind them of the truth they once denied. Part 4, Boundaries and Self-Sovereignty, the key to keeping radiance from becoming a burden. Jung once said, "No one can become light without daring to pass through their own darkness." Yet there is something many empaths must also learn, that light can only shine sustainably when it is protected by clear boundaries. Otherwise, the very gift becomes a burden, and the aura of empathy turns into a chain that binds them. Empaths tend to fling the doors of the heart wide open. Intuition and compassion convince them that love should not be limited. But Jung reminds us that all energy needs a container to exist. Light cannot radiate without a candle. Water cannot flow without a riverbed. Empathy without borders is merely a directionless current easily siphoned off or swept away. Here, boundaries are not walls for isolation. They are a sacred form that keeps energy moving in the right direction. Without boundaries, empaths slip into two extremes: either full identification with another's pain, becoming an emotional sponge, or such exhaustion that they withdraw, shut down, and lose their luminous nature. Both are forms of loss. Jung calls the discovery of boundaries part of individuation, the journey toward becoming one's whole self. When empaths learn to stand at the center of the ego, they no longer view empathy as an obligation to shoulder, but as a gift they may choose to give. This difference sounds small, yet it marks the decisive line between freedom and bondage. In practice, establishing boundaries requires 3 layers of awareness. First, discernment. Empaths must learn to tell apart their own emotions from those they've borrowed. This can begin with simple questions. Does what I feel right now arise from my experience or from the person in front of me? This habit is like continually mirroring inward, reminding oneself that not every wave in the heart belongs to one's own ocean. Second, selection. Empathy does not mean opening the door to everyone. Jung likened the psyche to a room. If you don't know who is allowed in, you soon find yourself lost in your own house. Selection does not mean shutting down. It is the clarity to distinguish who comes to grow with you and who comes to feed off you. This takes courage, for saying no can be harder than carrying someone. Yet that no is often the deepest compassion. Compassion for oneself and the other, because it refuses to fuel a spiral of dependency. Third, staying centered. Empaths are easily pulled into collective emotional fields where others heap energy and expectations upon them. Without a firm center, they are swept away and lose direction. This center is built through grounding practices, meditation, prayer, art, or simply solitary time in nature. These are the strings that tether the kite to the earth, allowing it to fly high without being lost to the wind. Science bears this out. Research on self-regulation shows that those who maintain psychological boundaries are less prone to emotional burnout and sustain empathy more effectively. They do not switch off sensitivity. They modulate it like a musician who knows when to strike a high note and when to let it soften. In truth, boundaries do not contradict compassion, they make it possible. A heart that is always open without limit breaks quickly. A heart that knows when to open and when to close can beat steadily for a lifetime. As Jung wrote, love has no power unless it is given a form. Boundaries are that form. Crucially, when empaths learn to live with boundaries, they no longer have to choose between protecting themselves and helping others. They enter a new equilibrium, fully present without being swept away. They empathize not from depletion, but from fullness. And when empathy springs from fullness, it becomes truly healing energy rather than a loop of suffering. Picture a lighthouse. It guides ships not by plunging into the sea to rescue each vessel, but by standing firm on the rocks and sending out a clear signal. So it is with empaths. With boundaries, they become lighthouses unswayed by each wave, yet lighting the way for the lost. Boundaries, then, are not selfish. They are the highest form of self-sovereignty and responsibility. They keep an empath's radiance bright, preventing it from being ground into ash. They allow an empath to move through the world without losing themselves, to give without running dry, to be present and still be free. Here, the empath's journey reaches a turning point. No longer a victim of sensitivity, no longer a bearer of others' darkness, but a clear, steady center, both soft and strong. From that center, empathic radiance ceases to be a burden and becomes an invitation, a call for others to step into self-sovereignty, self-healing, and freedom. Part 5. Transcendence. When the empath becomes a guide. Jung wrote, "The true healer heals not only with hands, but with presence. When empaths pass through the snares of shadow, learn to set boundaries, and hold their center, they are no longer merely survivors. They enter a new phase, transcendence, where their radiance not only protects themselves, but also lights the way for others." In depth psychology, transcendence does not mean escaping everyday life. It means remaining awake while living fully within it. At this stage, empaths have nothing to prove and no need to strain for recognition. They become like a spring, quiet, steady, cool, unassuming, yet nourishing life around them. Notably, empathy is no longer a burden. It becomes a form of wisdom. Empaths stop asking, "How can I carry this for you?" and begin asking, "How can I be so fully present that you find your own strength?" This is the shift from identification to resonance, from dissolving into another's pain to holding one's center so clearly that it reflects the other back to themselves. Jung saw this as individuation reaching wholeness. The empath no longer flees the shadow, nor tries to prove they are light. They face both and smile, knowing that light and shadow are the very materials of a whole human being. Practically, transcendent empaths display 3 clear qualities. First, composure in presence. When you enter a room, others feel the energy you bring. An empath who has not integrated their shadow often emits a field that is easily drained, anxious, tense, uncertain. A transcendent empath radiates calm steadiness. They need not speak much or explain. Their presence is the answer. This is the art of presence, praised in many spiritual traditions, the stillness of one person reaching the depths of another's soul. Second, leading by mirror rather than pressure. Transcendent empaths do not try to change people. They understand that any coercion, even in the name of love, breeds resistance. Instead, they live as a mirror. In their presence, others glimpse their own truth. Facing them, people recognize what they have avoided. This is the quietest yet strongest form of guidance, for it does not rob anyone of freedom. It returns responsibility for one's life. Third, connection with the whole. At Transcendence, empaths experience themselves not only as individuals, but as parts of something vast: a family, community, humanity, even the cosmos. Unlike before, they do not dissolve into that whole. They connect through self-sovereignty. Mystics call this unity in distinction, a state in which you are both one and all without losing your unique self. Contemporary neuroscience offers a parallel account. Research on heart-brain coherence shows that when people reach emotional balance and deep attentiveness, their electromagnetic field becomes more harmonious. This benefits them, less stress, stronger immunity, and influences others nearby. In other words, inner peace can radiate outward, a form of guidance by frequency without words. This explains why transcendent empaths become natural anchors in a community. They may not hold official titles, yet people seek them in times of need, wanting the solace of truth they embody. They are like ancient trees. They do not chase anyone, yet everyone comes for shade. Still, Jung warned, transcendence is not a final destination, but an ongoing process. Light and shadow change their forms, and we must continually rebalance. The transcendent empath is not someone beyond suffering, but someone who uses suffering as material for further expansion. Perhaps this is the greatest gift of transcendence. Empaths stop fearing pain. They regard it as a teacher. They stop fearing the dark, knowing it is merely what has not yet been illumined. They stop fearing their sensitivity, recognizing it not as a burden but as a compass. In a world of turbulence and division, the archetype of the transcendent empath is more needed than ever. When society frays, those who keep inner peace can become beacons for the collective. They offer no easy escape, but they reveal a path, the path of presence, compassion, and wisdom forged through suffering. In the end, transcendence is not about becoming someone else. It is about returning to yourself, full, clear, free. When empaths reach this point, they no longer live solely for themselves. They become guides, not because they try to, but because their very presence offers a silent invitation. Become yourself, as I have become myself. When looking back at the entire journey, we can clearly see an evolutionary circle in the empath, beginning with fragile sensitivity, passing through the snares of darkness, learning to build boundaries, and finally reaching transcendence, where it crystallizes into a mission. This is not an easy path, but it is precisely what shapes their unique value. Empaths often begin as wounded healers, souls who have endured such deep pain that they were forced to develop a refined nervous system in order to survive. At this stage, they are vulnerable to manipulation, easily drawn into cycles of over-identification with others' pain. Their aura shines brightly, yet it is fragile, like a candle without a protective cover. As they step onto the path of self-awareness, they begin to discover emotional alchemy, the ability to turn pain into wisdom. Yet, as Jung emphasized, every gift carries within it a curse. Without consciousness, sensitivity pulls them down. With awakening, it becomes the very strength that lifts them higher. Here lies the turning point. Instead of asking, "Why am I so sensitive?" they begin to ask, "What can I do with this gift?" Then comes the paradox. Light attracts shadow. They learn that not everyone who comes to them comes to heal. Some arrive only to drain. From these stumbles, they begin to build boundaries, not to close off, but to ensure that compassion does not turn into a burden. They realize that empathy needs form and compassion needs discipline. It is then that they step into the phase of transcendence. Empathy becomes wisdom, presence becomes light. They no longer carry for others but resonate with them, no longer dissolve into others' pain but reflect it back. At this stage, the empath no longer lives only for themselves. They become a mirror in which others see themselves, a landmark for the community to return to, a small but steady flame in a world of turbulence. Ultimately, all these steps crystallize into a mission to live authentically so as to become a source of inspiration and healing for humanity. The empath is not a savior. They cannot and need not carry the whole world. But by standing firm in their own center, they give the world its most precious gift, proof that sensitivity is not weakness, but a path toward wisdom, compassion, and inner freedom. This journey, in the end, is a closed circle that opens infinitely, from the wounded healer who bears pain to the sovereign healer who transforms that pain into light. And this is not only one person's story, but the story of any soul brave enough to walk into their own darkness to find the light. In today's world, when humanity needs spiritual anchors more than ever, empaths are living reminders that true light does not come from fleeing darkness, but from daring to pass through it, transforming it into fuel for wisdom and compassion. And perhaps the simplest conclusion for this journey is this: keep your candle burning. It need not blaze like the sun, it only needs to endure through the night. For sometimes, a single small flame is enough to guide a lost soul home.